Does it sort of ever surprise you, or do you ever kind of get a moment where you think these protocols and these kind of rules that you set up more or less to connect up 4 or 5 computers in the late 60s kind of unchanged now are the core of the global financial system, information system, and quite a lot more? Like, does that must feel quite strange?
Yes and no. It does feel strange. On the other hand, it was, I don't want this to sound too egoistic, but it was pretty clear from the outset that once you got this going, that it would take off. That everybody, you want your computers to be connected, and it would make it possible to change the speed at which transactions took place, and that this was all just a natural progression. And it might be hard to predict exactly what the timing is. It might be hard to predict who the winners and losers were going to be, but the gross effect was unequivocal.
Because it sounds like you were thinking about quite a lot of the stuff that came a lot later, right at the beginning.
Yeah, and you said 4 or 5 computers. The initial set was 4 computers, but that was the program was set up as a starter set of 4 and an option to continue, and everybody believed that it would continue. That was a matter of just a good contracting practice and good financial management, that you don't make a commitment to the whole thing. You sort of have a way of saying, yeah, look. So even the first 4, we knew that we were not the 4. We were just an initial set, and that it would expand rapidly. So in my mind, the difference between what we were doing or let me put it this way, at the outset, it was clear that it was going to be scores of computers, not just 4, but quite a lot of variation, and it would be cross country, and it would be all the research sites basically, and it would go to be big. It would go to be 40, 50, 60 machines. I mean, it would be huge.
Maybe a 60. Sort of a British question, this one, but either with or without the benefit of hindsight, and kind of, trying to say, could you have looked 50 years ahead is obviously a huge. Are there any sort of big decisions, or even smaller decisions, you wish had been taken differently? Or
yeah.
Do you kind of think it was done as well as it could be? Or?
Well, clearly one of the more troublesome things in retrospect was, and I didn't have anything to do with, it was the addressing structure. So on the ARPANET, the addressing structure was a relatively small number, and we can encompass up to about 60, it turns out, different sites and about 4 times that many machines maybe. In the transition to the internet, and now I by that time turned my attention elsewhere, the decision was made to have 32-bit addresses. So 32 bits gives you, if you use all of them, it's 4 billion. If I thought 60 was large, 4 billion is enormous.
4 billion is bigger than 60.
and then you get to this awkward point where that turns out not to be big enough. Now, they're not all used densely, but that surely one could see that ahead of time. And the protocols were awkwardly designed in a way that did not make it easy to change the addressing structure smoothly across the entire suite of protocols. And some of those mistakes in the design go back to the times that I was involved in, so I have some pangs of embarrassment about, we should have known better. We should have encapsulated the addresses in a way that it would have been trivial to change the structure of that, and everything would have been smooth. That's sort of good tradecraft from a computer science point of view. And as I say, that bothers me. So that's one area. On the security area, there were some, you have to go back in time and understand some of the prevailing forces. Cryptography was in a much less advanced stage. Asymmetric keys were not yet known about publicly, RSA and so forth, had not yet been invented. Although later, much later, we learned that GCHQ actually did, and it had it on the shelf and hidden away and so forth. And then Diffie and Hellman, and then later Vervest and Schlier and Edelman came out with their inventions. But it was also computationally expensive, and so if you wanted to encrypt everything, you had to slow everything down to a crawl. And then it turned out that the government was not too keen, not the ARPA part, but NSA, and I'm sure similar in Britain, to have anybody outside of the government working on cryptography would actively discourage it and so forth. That was a different era. And we didn't anticipate the scaling issue too much. In those days, users were around time-sharing systems, and each time-sharing system had a management structure. And so if somebody was misbehaving, you'd call up the appropriate authority and say, "You got a guy there who's screwing up," and then somebody would tap them on the shoulder and say, "Stop doing that."
Yeah.
That doesn't work when you've got billions of users around the world and total anonymity and so forth. And so that's a bit more problematic.
Yeah, I guess both privacy and security were hard to build in and almost not necessary.
And then the privacy aspect has become a very big deal, of course. I don't know what would have happened if we had made a bigger issue of those things at the outset. It would slow things down in a lot of ways. The people who are worried about that tend to be very strong-minded and loud-mouthed about it, and it's sometimes hard to get sensible progress in reasonable ways because you get a lot of absolute kind of thinking, not all of which is easy to accommodate.
Where do you think a good compromise lies on privacy?
I like the idea that information about an individual belongs fundamentally to that individual, but I want to say quickly, if I go into your store and I buy something, there's a transaction. Who owns that? Who owns the fact of that transaction? Do I own it or do you own it? Well, that's not an easily answerable question because it's as much your data as it is mine. It becomes then a question of what are the societal norms about how that information is used. But if you look for intuitions based not so much on the way the Internet's built, but just sort of the way humans interact, nobody's going to take away from you the fact that we've had that conversation, had that interaction, and you will carry that around for the rest of your life if you wish. And that gives you a certain knowledge and power about. So if you're an establishment or you're, any other kind of entity, and you're interacting with a lot of people, it's very hard to take away that information, and you will use it for all sorts of purposes. You use it to improve the service you give people, and you'll use it to know the foibles about what people are like, and you'll use it to know something about competition, and you'll use it to know something about what the demands are in your future service. All that information plays many, many different roles.
Yeah. I think coming to the close, but kind of sort of last question for me, I think. We sort of talk a lot about a backlash against the internet or a backlash against technology. Do you think it's a backlash against the internet, or do you think it's a backlash against a small group of companies on the internet, or a little of both? And what can we do about it?
Well, I'm not sure I understand your premise. When you say this backlash, what are we talking about?
So, if you look 5 or 10 years ago, we were still in the world where media coverage, most political coverage was the internet's changing the world, everything's going to be great, you'll be able to do this one. So we seem to have had a shift in the last 2 or 3 years where it's at least being viewed a lot more skeptically, but often quite, a lot of alarmist coverage, a lot of, this is... Is it about a couple of the companies on it, or is there a pushback, or is this just something becoming a reality rather than a future-y dream? The internet just being a fact of life now.
Sure, there are alarms